All right, four, your core tenants. The national plan is established the seven core tenants with the representative of the value of the assumption of the critical infrastructure community of the issue with the national, regional, state, local, tribal, territorial, the owner and operator levels. One plan, critical infrastructure security and resilience. One, risk should be identified, managed, coordinated with a comprehensive way to craft the critical infrastructure, communicate, and enable effective allocation of the security resilient resource with the collaborative managing risk sharing with the information, including the smart practice of the promoting the more efficient and effective use of the resource, minimizing duplication effort, enable the development and execute of the more comprehensive measures sector for the against the disrupt and prepare threats for the mitigated vulnerability, reduce consequences across the nation, to ensure the comprehensive approach to the risk assessment of the critical infrastructure community, consider the strategies to achieve risk mitigation as well as the other way for the address for the including acceptance, avoidance, and transparencies. Two, understanding the addressing risk of the cross-sector dependency, interdependency, essential for the enhancing critical infrastructure sector and security and resilience. The infrastructure sector would interact with including the resiliency and shared information community, technology, and then the cloud certification for the national critical infrastructure partnership collectively manage risk. For example, the all critical infrastructure sector rely on the factor and functions that provide with the energy, transport, communication, transportation, water system, among others. In addition, interdependency flow both ways. Dependency energy over the communication system and each of the other function that is important for the critical infrastructure community for the understand the appropriate account of the dependency, interdependency, managing risk. 3. Gain knowledge of the infrastructure risk of the interdependency required for the information sharing across the critical infrastructure community through the operation perspective of the stakeholders of the critical infrastructure community possess and produce the diverse information for the useful enhancement of the critical infrastructure security and resiliency, sharing with the joint planning of the information imperative, comprehensive address of the critical infrastructure security resiliency as an environment increase the interconnectedness for happening with the appropriate legal protections relationship with enabling technology consistent processes must be in place. 4. Partnership and approach with the critical infrastructure security resilience recognize the unique perspective of the cooperative advantage of the diverse critical infrastructure community. The public private partnership for maintaining critical infrastructure security resiliency, well-functional partnership that depends on the set of attributes including trust, the defined purpose of the activity, clearly articulated goals, measurable progress, and outcome of the guide with the shared activities, leadership, and improvement, the clear, frequent communication, flexibility, and adaptability, all levels of the government and private and non-profit sectors bring a unique expertise to the capability for the core competency of the national effort to recognize the value of the different perspectives help the partnership with the more distinctive understanding, challenges, solutions related with the critical infrastructure security and resilience. Regional and state, local, and tribal territorial partnership are crucial with developing sharp perspective of the gaps and acting on the proof of the critical infrastructure security and resilience. National plan emphasizes the participation, partnering across the institution, geographical boundaries, achieving the secondary security and resilience. Risk of the often local consequence of having is essential to execute initiatives and regional scale and way. The components of the operationalize the national effort that require the locally based on the public and the private and non-profit organization provide the perspective of the assessment risk of the mitigation strategy, the local partnership through the country of the augmentated with the efforts of the existing partnership at the national level, the essential for the truth of the national effort of the strength of the security of the and resiliency. 6. Infrastructure critical to the United States transcends national boundaries, requiring cross-border collaboration, mutual assistance, other cooperative agreements. United benefits depending on the global network of the infrastructure enable the national security of the way of life, the distributive nature of the corrected of these assets, and the nature of creating the complex environmental with the risk of the nations facing the distinctively contained in the border, increasing the cases of the services that provide with the critical infrastructure often depend on the information gathered and stored process of the highly distributed location and interoperative the government's private sector and international partners work together. This is included with collaborating with the fully understanding the supply chain vulnerabilities, implementing coordinated with the not competing global security resilience, not competing with global security resiliency. The national plan is focused on the domestic efforts of the critical infrastructure security with the resiliency while recognizing the international aspect with the national approach. Or 7. Security resiliency should be considered during the design asset system and the networks of critical infrastructure built and refreshed and those involved with making the decision. Those include the related to the control system should be considered the most effective and efficient with identify, determine, detect, disrupt, and prepare with the threats from the hazard, mitigate the vulnerabilities, minimize consequences. This is considered infrastructure resilient principles. Alright, 5. Collaboration to manage risk. The national efforts of the strength of the critical infrastructure security of the resiliency depend on the ability of the public and private sector of the critical infrastructure owner of the operative domain, the risk-informed decision of the most effective solution available with allocating limiting risk of the both state and state of the crisis of the operative for the risk management as the cornerstone of the national plan with its relative to the national, regional, state, and local level. The national, regional, and local resiliency depend upon the creating of the maintaining a sustainable, trusted partnership between the public and private sector, the individual entity with the responsible the management of the risk of their organization partnership, to improve the understanding of the threat and vulnerability consequences, and how to manage with them, and sharing with the indicator of the practices and coordinate with the policy of the Responsible Recovery Act. Critical infrastructure partners with the management of the risk of the base of the diverse comments of the community, the focus on the customer welfare, the cooperative of the government, or structure of the risk tolerance with the way with the organizing of the organizations, as well as sector to sector, depending on the business plan with the resource of the organization, operating the structure of the regulatory environment that also be different with the private sector of the government based on the ordinary underlying constraint with the different entity, the likely of the different priorities with the respect with the security investment with the potential of the different judgments as to whether the appropriate point with the risk of the tolerance risk be. The private sector organization generally can increase the investment of the risk tolerance to provide for the community of the takeover of the investment of the security of the resilience of the litigated limits of the government must provide for the national security of the public safety, operating the different systems of the limiting legitimate limits. The government must provide a national security, public safety with different sets of limits in doing so. Finding the appropriate value of the proposition among the partnership required with the understanding of differing perspectives, how they may affect the efforts of the set joint priorities within the parameter of the critical infrastructure, the security, the resilience, depending with applying with the risk of the management property of both industry and government, coupled with the available resources and incentives to guide the sustaining efforts. The section is organized based on the critical infrastructure management framework. They include with the 2006 National Infrastructure Protection Plan update with the national plan. The updates help to clarify the components of the streamline the steps of the framework to depict the figure 3 shown with specifically 3 elements of the critical infrastructure: physical, cyber, and human. Explicitly identified with the show and integrate with throughout the step of the framework, and an appropriate addition with the update with the framework of the consolidate the number of steps or chevrons. Include the prioritization, implementation, risk management, activity prioritization, risk management, mitigation option, integral part of the decision-making process to do the risk management activities implemented. Finally, reference to the feedback loop, then removed instead of the framework now depict the importance of information sharing throughout the entire risk management process. Information shared for each of the steps of the framework include the measuring effectiveness and the step facilitating feedback and enabling the continuous improvement of the critical infrastructure security and resilience effort. The critical infrastructure risk management framework support the decision-making process of the critical infrastructure of the partner with collaborative undertaking to inform of the selection of the risk management act of the framework, not binding any of the organization have the risk management model provided effective and should be maintained. It does, however, the provide an organization construction for those model. The section presents a section selection risk management activities improved implemented across the critical infrastructure community, but the specific contributions of various partners are described where applicable. In addition, with the call-out boxes throughout the section identifies the linkage between the step of the risk management framework, specific action identified, call to action, section 6 of the national plan. The critical infrastructure risk management plan framework is designed that provides flexibility for all of the selectors and across the different geographical regions. There is partnership, and it can be tailored to dissimilar operating environments applied with all the threats and hazards of the risk management framework. Is intended to complement the support of the completion of the threat hazard identification risk management, or THERA process conducted by the regional, state, local, tribal, territorial, and or urban area jurisdiction. Establish capability priorities, comprehensive preparedness guide 201, threat and hazard identification risk, and second edition cites infrastructure owners and the operative the source of the threat hazard information valuable partnerships, including the threat and hazard identification risk assessment. The critical infrastructure community share for the information throughout the step of the risk management framework with documentation build up best practice lesson learned. Help identify the fill the gap of the security resilience efforts with it is essential for the community to share the risk of the information. Also know the risk communication will define the exchange of the information with the goal of improving the risk understanding, affecting the risk perception, and equipping people and or groups acting with appropriate response to identifications at risk. Risk management enable the critical infrastructure community to focus on the threats and hazards that are likely to cause the harm and employ the approach of the dandelion to mitigate the effect of these incidents. It also increases the security with the strength of the resiliency, identify prioritizing, ensuring the council of the essential function of services support, enhance restoration. Set infrastructure goals. The national established with a broad national goal for the critical infrastructure set. Resiliency of the national goals are support with the objective of the priorities developed in the sector level, which may be articulated with the sector-specific plans. Serve as targets and the collaborative among planning of the sector-specific agencies agencies. These sector plans partners are in the government and private sectors. So you have a set of goals, and you have the related calls to action, establish the national focus of the joint priority settings, determine the collective action through the joint planning efforts. As discussed in Section 2 of the National Multi-Year Priorities of the Development and Input at all levels of partnership with the complement with the goals of the priorities might focus on the partnership with the goals of the cross-sector issue with the attention of the resources applied with the critical infrastructure community with the most significant impact with the critical infrastructure owners as well as the local, tribal, territorial, regional entity of the community identified objectives and priorities of the critical infrastructure aligned with the national priorities, national goals, sector objectives are tailored and scaled with the operational risk and environments of the available resources. Or identified infrastructure. To manage critical infrastructure effectively, the partner must identify the asset of the system network of the essential for the continued operation, consider the associated dependency, interdependency, as aspect of risk management process should be identified, information communication technology facilitate the provisions of the essential service. Critical infrastructure of the partners vary critically differently based on the unique situation, operation mode, with associated risk. Federal government identify the priorities, nationalized significant and critical infrastructure based on statutory definition, national consideration, state, local, tribal, territorial governments identify with the prioritization infrastructure according to their business with the operating environment, associated risk infrastructure owner operators identified assessment risk networks that are essential to their continued operation, delivery, products, and services with the customer and sector level of sector-specific agencies collaborate with the owners in the state, local, tribal, territorial entities to develop a list of the infrastructure for the significant national, regional, local levels. Related to call action, analyze dependency and interdependency. Effective management require the understanding critically with the associated with the interdependency infrastructure national plan and identify the certain lifeline functions essential for the operation of the most critical infrastructure sector lifeline functions, including the communication, energy, transportation, and water critical infrastructure partnership. They identify the essential function of the resource of the impact of the business communities, and the identification of lifelines used and can support the prepared planning and the capability development. Your critical infrastructure risk can be assessed in these terms: a threat, natural or man-made occurrence with an individual entity with the action, with the indicator of the potential harm to any life of the information, operation, environmental, and property, with the vulnerability, the physical threat of the operational as attributed to the renders to entity with the exploitation suspected given the hazard, consequent, effective of the event and incident occurrence. Risk assessment conducted with many of the critical infrastructure partners to inform the own decision to make by making the broad range of the methodology. These assessments with the critical infrastructure community leaders to understand the most of the likely sphere incident, how they can affect the operation community of the use of the information, supporting the planning and the resource allocation in a coordinated manner. To assess the risk aspects effectively, the critical infrastructure partners include the owners, operators, sector council, government agency, the timely, reliable, actionable information regarding the threats and vulnerability, consequences, of non-government must be involved in the development and disseminate of the product regarding threats of the vulnerability of the potential consequence of the provide with the risk of the information, trusted environmental partnership, and understand intelligent information risk requirements of conducting joint analysis when appropriate. The critical infrastructure partnership can be great value with improving the understanding risk of the both cyber and physical systems and assets in neither public nor private sector event either fully understand the risk of the integration wide range knowledge as analysts. Some information sharing initiative, except for both the national and regional level, the information sharing activities can protect privacy by applying the FIPPES and protective civil liberties, complying with the applicable laws and policies is equal crucial and ensure adequate protection sensitive business and security information that could cause severe adverse impacts on private business and economy, public and private enterprises, secure the unauthorized disclosure, access, or use. The federal government has the statutory responsibility to safeguard critical infrastructure information to harm the Homeland Security other agency protected critical infrastructure information program, other protocols classified national security information, law enforcement, sensitive information, federal security classification guides. Your Protected Critical Infrastructure Information Program, authorized with the Critical Infrastructure Information Act of 2002, is implementing guidance Title 6 of the Code Federal Regulation Part 29. It defines both the requiring of the critical infrastructure information and the government agencies must follow the access and safeguard of critical infrastructure information. Implementing risk management activities. The decision makers prioritize activity managing critical infrastructure risk based on the criticality, effective of the infrastructure scope as such activity, the potential risk reduction. Some risk management activities address multiple aspects of the risk, while others more targeted address specific threats and vulnerability potential consequences of the activity divided in the following approaches. Or to identify, deter, detect, disrupt, prepare for threats and hazards. Establish, implement, joint plan for the process of evaluate the need, but increase the security, resilience, and measure for the base on the hazard warnings, the threat reports, conduct continuous monitoring on the cyber system, and employ the security protection system to detect the delay when the act of the intrusion to detect the malicious activity, threaten critical infrastructure related with the operational activities across the sector, implementation, intrusion, detection, intrusion protection system on incentive, the mission critical networks facility, identify the prevent and unauthorized exploit, access, protection, exploitation, monitoring critical infrastructure facility system potential of the target for attack, and they through local enforcement and public utilities. Reduce vulnerabilities, bold, security, the resiliency design of the operational assessment of the system and the network that employ the setting of the consideration, locating new infrastructure, avoiding floodplains, systematic seismic zones, or other risk-prone locations. Develop and conduct training and exercise programs to enhance awareness of the understanding of the common vulnerability for the possible mitigation strategies. Leverage learn, apply with the cover action incident with the enhanced protective measures. Establish executive business, government, emergency agencies, continuing plan with the local, regional level with the facility with the continuing performance and critical function during an emergency. Address cyber vulnerabilities through the continuous diagnostic prioritization of high-risk vulnerabilities. Undertake risk development so efforts of the reduced cyber and physical vulnerabilities have to provide difficulty expenses to address. Or mitigate consequences. Share information, support situational awareness, damage assessment, cybersecurity, physical critical infrastructure during and after incident, including nature, extent of the threat, and cascading events, status of the response, work to restore critical infrastructure operation following the accident. Support the provisional essential, such as emergency power with the critical facility, fuel supplies, emergency responders, public potable water, mobile communication, food, pharmaceuticals for affected community. Ensure the assessment of the information backed up with the remote service of the redundant the process implemented with the key function to reduce potential consequences of the cybersecurity incident. Remove the key operational function for the internet-connected business work with the reducing likelihood with the cybersecurity incident will result with the compromise of the essential services. Recalls related to rapidly identify the assess of the respondent cascading effectively during the following incident report, infrastructure committee, regional recovery. Ensure the incident with affecting the cybersecurity of the fully contained the asset system network facility restored from the pre-incident status with the effective information available to the uncompromised secure state. Recognize account interdependency and response recovery restoration plan, repair, replace damaged infrastructure, cause effective damage, design the most secure, resilient, utilizing and ensure the reliability of emergency communication capabilities. Contribute to the development and the execution of private sector, state, local, tribal, and territorial, regional priorities in both near and long term. The above activity, for example, the risk management activity undertaken with support of the overall achievement of the security resilience, well, with the organizational, community, sector, national level, the prevention activities more closely associated with the address of the threat and protecting the general address vulnerabilities, respond with recovery activities to help with the minimum of the consequent mitigation efforts of the transcend of the threat and the ability, consequent spectrum of the five mission that describe the national preparedness goal of the system, provide the useful framework for the consideration risk assessment, investment. Figure 4 illustrates the relationship to the national prepared mission of the area of the eliminating elements of the risk. National preparedness goal that establishes 31 core capability with the support of five national preparedness mission of the develop many of the capabilities that contributes to the achievement of the critical infrastructure security resilience and communities owners and operatives apply with the community identified actively manage risk and the efforts to enhance critical infrastructure risk considered part of setting targets. Support efforts of the advance of during the incident of the critical infrastructure for the community, collaborate with the structure established the national prevention framework, the national prevention framework, national mitigation framework with the national response framework, national disaster framework, and the international national cyber incidental response to or its successor. One example of the structure is to support collaborative efforts for the provide with the national response framework, organizational coordinate with the critical infrastructure related with the critical related activity conduct of the response nationally declared disaster major incident necessitating federal assistance critical infrastructure support. So means how critical infrastructure security and resiliency activities integrate with the national risk framework, describe the policy roles and responsibility Incident-related actions coordinate with the structure of the assets, the prioritize, secure, the restore critical infrastructure during actual potential domestic incident of the annex, leverage of the partnership structure, information sharing, risk management described as in the national plan. Similar linkage and plan will continue to enhance the other frameworks and incident response plans. In addition, they identify the threat and vulnerability consequent with the reducing activity, reducing risk reduction being achieved with the critical infrastructure control system design for during securities, risk and resiliency measure for the design decision can be facilitated integration measure to mitigate physical, cyber vulnerability, natural technology hazards at a lower cost, and the government businesses can better itself than measure increased security resilience of both critical infrastructure, broader society with risk analysis, evidence-based design practice, coordination costs, benefits. Such efforts to help during infrastructure recovery efforts. And the federal government is working communities in industry to rebuild infrastructure. All right, measure effectiveness. The critical infrastructure community evaluate the effectiveness of the risk management efforts effective at the national, state, local, the regional level, the developing metric of both direct and indirect indicator measurement, subsector, sector-specific agencies and sector coordinated council through the sector-specific planning process to develop attributed with the support of the national goals, national priorities, the other sector-specific priorities. Some of the measures inform the risk management efforts of the partnership through the critical infrastructure communication held with the national picture of the progress of the tour of the nation with the national plan and national preparedness group goal. Our national level, the national plan articulated for the board with the achieve of the plan with vision complemented by several multiple years national priority of the critical infrastructure community subsequently evaluate the collective progress of accomplishing goals and priorities. Evaluating process function integrated with continuing process, articulate vision and national goals, divide national priorities, identify with high level the output for the outcomes associated with the national goals and national priorities. Collect performance data, date of the actions that identify with the outcome and the outcomes, evaluate progress of achievement of the national priorities, national goals, and national vision. Update national priorities, adapt risk assessment, and accordingly revisit national goals, vision on a periodic basis. Alright, just regular evaluation on the progress toward the national goals, informing the evaluation, security, resilience, and protective plan, exercise the real world, and some of the provide opportunity for learning and adaptation. For example, fuel shortage, Hurricane Sandy illustrated the interdependence, complexity of the infrastructure system, and the challenge of the achieving shared situational awareness during large events, need with the information collection of the sharing among the government, public, private sector, partnership, restoration, activity, critical infrastructure, national preparedness communities conduct the exercise, ongoing prices for the national exercise program mechanism to assess the value of the capability of the organization, agency, the jurisdictions during each and after the plan with the unplanned operation. Partners identify individual group weeks and implement, evaluate corrective action, share with the best practice, wider infrastructure, emergency management, community, such learning, adaptation, inform future plans, activity, technical assistance, training, and education. Alright, 6. Call to action step to advance the national effort.